Thanks. My name is Adri. I was quite impressed, actually, you were able to pronounce my surname. So yeah, it's a good start. So I work at a company called Flamingo, and what we do basically is we help companies. Some of our clients include Unilever, Danone, Samsung, Disney, so some of these multinationals. We help them understand people and culture to develop brand strategies, to generate ideas for product innovations. Our main work is around Southeast Asia, so primarily ASEAN, but we also do a lot of work in China, a bit in India, and more we're doing work in emerging markets like Africa and South America. So part of our work is traveling all the time, and it's also about meeting people, spending time with them, understanding their lives, and really getting to the core of why they do what they do, and eventually looking for opportunities for our clients, basically. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk to you about today is based on these encounters, these stories from the people we've met. And it's it's a really interesting story. It's the story of urban migration. Actually, today, I was asked to talk about crossover, but I want to talk about crossover through the lens of urban migration. And why urban migration? Because urban migration itself is a crossover, where you cross over from being a rural inhabitant to an urbanite. The other thing is that urban migration, actually, I think is one of the biggest, most important global phenomena that are happening right now. It has implications on economies, on security, on lots of different other things. But also it has implications on creativity. It's also a source of ingenuity and innovation, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. All right, urban migration. So in 2008, there was a very important historical milestone. The world went from majority rural to majority urban. So we used to be a world where people mostly live outside of cities, and now most people live in cities. And that's actually moving very fast. By 2050, 66% of mankind will be urban, up from about half today. And this is really important because not only in terms of like macro factors, the economy, et cetera, but also when a person moves into the city, it changes them. It changes their life. They have a new point of view on the world. They have a new vision of their place in society. And also in that transition, there's lots of hopes and aspirations, often unfulfilled aspirations. So it's quite an intense and rich experience to move from being someone coming from the village or from a rural area into the city. Now, why is it really important? One of the reasons why it's really important for us to know now is that the pace at which this rural to urban crossover is happening is the highest it has ever been. So it's happening very, very fast, more than ever before. And it has always happened in history, but this is when it's happening the fastest. Some crazy stat I just found out, 1.4 million people right now every week are crossing over from a rural area into a city. And so it's a flood of people coming into cities. And this is happening now. And it's particularly relevant for us here in Asia because most of this urban migration is happening here. So since 2010, Asia has urbanized faster by 48% than any other region in the world. So if you think about the big countries, big populated countries here, China, India, Indonesia, this is really what's driving urban migration in the world. I'll give you a few examples. So China actually passed 50% urban in December 2011, so quite recent. But I think what's happening also in China, if you've traveled to second and third tier China, they're building cities everywhere, which means that villages are not turning into cities, and it's kind of being critiqued quite a lot because they're losing their village culture. But that's happening very, very fast. India is another one. I only found out because of doing this research, so doing this presentation. Apparently, India is going to surpass China's population really soon. And it's like 1 million difference or something crazy like that. But the interesting thing to know about India is that currently they're 2/3 rural, and in about 25 years, they're going to be 2/3 urban. So that's happening very, very fast. And finally, Indonesia. I'm Indonesian. Any Indonesians in the room? All right. And so if you've been to Jakarta, you know how crazy crowded it is. It's super congested. That's urban migration. And that's one of the big issues that the local government is facing right now. It's just the influx, the tsunami of people coming into Jakarta, and it's making it extremely crowded, extremely congested. And so all of this is happening in all of these cities around Asia. And when you think about why do people want to move into cities, and what is this drive to move into cities, actually this dream to make it big in the big city and to become successful and wealthy, it has always been around us. And if you look at history, if you look at the folklore in all of these different countries, it's always been very present in people's psyches, and very much amplified by popular culture. One of the most successful films a few years ago in Indonesia was called Merantau, which literally means moving into the city. It's a film called Urban Migration, basically. And it's the story about this guy, Yuda, who comes from this village in Padang in Sumatra. And basically he vows to his mom, I will never come back before I make money and I'm successful in Jakarta, and I will make our village a lot wealthier, blah, blah. So he goes into this heroic journey to Jakarta, takes a bus, and basically he fights his way through Jakarta with his silat skills. So you've got these traditional martial arts skills. And basically his final battle is where he defeats the rich expat. So it's just kind of weird. I wonder what that says about Indonesia. Maybe we want to kick some expat ass there. So just to say that this dream, this idea of this heroic journey of the urban migrant, I think it fuels people's idea about about moving into the city. Now, this large migration is history's largest migration. What this is creating is actually big new urban spaces, usually on the fringes of big cities. And these are called arrival cities. And this is what I want to focus on after this. You can call it a favela, a slum, a kampung kumuh. These are massive urban spaces, which are usually these are places you probably don't see when you travel to a city, and you probably don't want to go to. It's full of issues, it's overpopulated, there's lots of sanitation problems, health, crime, etc. But also what they are, actually, this is where most of the most rapid transformation is happening in these cities. And as we'll see later on, it's also a place of intense entrepreneurialism, where people are hustling and thinking about creative ways to get to where they want to get. What I want to do now is share some stories of people who live in these arrival cities, so you really get a sense of what it is they're going through. This is Tariq. He's a single guy, age 25. He's from Bangladesh. And basically, he comes from this small village outside of Dhaka, and he wants to be a movie star. He's got the style going already with his singlet, and it's kind of gangster. But basically, he came from this background. He's actually doing quite okay. His family his family's got a farm, and if he wanted to, he could continue kind of his dad's farm, and he'd be sorted. But he had other plans. He wanted to be a celebrity, so he moved to Dhaka, and now. He has this shitty job as a tailor in a garment factory, but on the weekends he works as a T-boy in a movie studio, and he's not paid, but he loves it because he can brush shoulders with lots of celebrities. And in fact, the sunnies he's got here was given by a celebrity in Bangladesh, and it's like his prized possession, and he thinks it's going to bring him luck. So this is just a story of one of these guys that really shows this desire to make it big, and he's really determined. I've got another story, but which is a slightly different perspective. So this is a family in Jakarta, and it's quite similar in the sense that they've also got this drive for upward mobility. But from a family's perspective, so this is Bani and Ina, and they live in a slum, I think in Warung Buncit in South Jakarta. But they moved to Jakarta, and really their aspiration is to elevate their status, elevate their family, but through their children. So Bani here works as a driver. He's working very, very hard, and it's all about elevating his sons by giving them an education that he didn't have, and also exposing them. And his dream basically is for them to be white collar and to be an urbanite, have an urban lifestyle, an urban mindset. So he's working very hard. His first salary was actually to buy them a really fancy TV. And he said it was for his children to have exposure to the world. He doesn't want his kids to go out and meet friends at school and not know about what's going on in the world. So this is the kind of spirit that's going on in there. If you followed Indonesian politics lately, our new president Jokowi has just been inaugurated. So you should know about that because it's a really important thing that's happening in Indonesia right now. So Jokowi is loved by lots of people, and I think what really resonates with people is that he himself is an urban migrant. So he came from a small village outside of Solo in central Java. He made his way through to become the mayor of Solo. And then he became the governor of Jakarta, and now he's the president of Indonesia. So a lot of people resonate with that story of basically moving upwards. Yeah. One last story of people in these arrival cities. This is Tulin, this lady here. She's living in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City. She's got a son. And she lives with her brother, but he can't work because he's got this medical condition, so she's supporting the whole family. She works as a helper for two wealthy families in Ho Chi Minh. They absolutely love her. And because of that, one of them has promised to support her child's education, so putting him in an English-speaking school, which is really, the answer to all her hopes. And the other one is giving her lots of hand-me-downs, like furniture and electronics and stuff like that. And she's got a motorcycle. She's the first person in her neighborhood to have a brand new motorcycle, and that really means a lot to her. But I think the reason I'm telling the story of Tulin is because this is quite typical of people who are in this transition, who want to adopt an urban lifestyle. A lot of it is about acquiring an urban toolkit. So these are the things, the objects that allow you to go into an urban lifestyle. The motorcycle, for example, is hugely symbolic. It provides mobility, and in a practical level, it opens up lots of opportunities. The mobile phone makes you connected, and just symbolically as well. You're living in the city. BlackBerry, Indonesia was BlackBerry's second largest market in the world after the US, and it was fueled by the emerging middle class who were buying these BlackBerries from the gray market. And TVs as well. So this urban toolkit is really important to them. And this is what fuels a lot of our work with our clients as well, is catering to this emerging middle class. All right. So I told you all these stories about these different people, but I think the thing that really unites them, and you've probably figured this out, is this drive, this desire to move up in life, to be among the upwardly mobile. And this is what's driving, it's a very intense moment in their life, this transition where it's full of hope, and this is what they're really thinking about. But as you may have guessed, there is a tension. And the tension is that as much as they want to incorporate themselves into urban life, they have neither the means nor the money. And two things can happen. Either they become really frustrated and depressed about it, or the second thing is their hustle. And actually, this is where you see lots of stories of people coming up with really ingenious ideas and innovations and creativity. So I think this is the whole point why I wanted to talk to you about this stuff, because there's some really amazing, inspiring stuff that I'd like to share that is coming from these arrival cities. And I want to show some examples. So there is actually a term for it, and it's called Jugaad. It's a Hindi term. Some of you may have heard of it, but it's quite a popular term. But it basically refers to the ingenuity of citizens living in resource-constrained environments. Some guy who wrote about this, he wrote about Jugaad innovation. He said that it's like the MacGyver spirit. Does anyone know MacGyver here? Okay, so if you were a kid of the 80s, you probably know MacGyver. But MacGyver was this guy, this character on his TV show, and basically he was always in these like really difficult circumstances, and he could just pick up like a stick or whatever, and it became a weapon or something, or it was really amazing. So that's the spirit of Jugaad. It's the MacGyver spirit, basically, and it was inspired by. The term was inspired from a few entrepreneurs in India who were able to create these amazing products which were very low in cost but very high in value. And that's a different kind of innovation. And it's a type of innovation that we, especially here with our clients who operate in these emerging markets, are facing more and more because they have to operate with very few resources and make things cheap, basically. And that's quite a big challenge. So I want to show you some examples. I won't show you like silly memes of people doing stupid stuff like this. I've got some better examples. But basically, when you've got necessity, so necessity is the mother invention, it's true, but its father is creativity. So when you've got necessity and you've got creativity, usually it can lead to amazing, innovative ideas. So this is the first example. This is a Jugaad inventor. His name is Mansukh. Has anyone heard of this guy? Okay. Mansukh used to live he lives in a village where basically they have no electricity, and even if they had access to electricity, they wouldn't be able to afford it. But what they really needed was refrigeration, which is kind of basic, but it's basically so they could keep their food for a bit longer before it goes bad. And so Mansukh said, you know what, I'm going to do something about it. And what he did, basically, he created Mitikool, which is the greenest fridge in the world, which is quite amazing. And it's not only the greenest fridge in the world, it's also biodegradable, it's super cheap, and it runs on no electricity at all. And that's quite amazing. And I think you can only come up with something like that if you're really stuck in a situation like him, right? But it has completely changed the lifestyle of people around him because now this simple tool is able to keep fruit and veg for 5 days and dairy for 2 days. And how it works, if you're interested, because I know there's lots of creatives and innovators here. Basically, there's two compartments. There's a top compartment. So it's made completely of clay. And there's two compartments. There's a top compartment with water, and it keeps flowing. The water keeps flowing around the clay, which keeps it cold. And this is how it refrigerates the food inside it. So this is Mansukh, and this is an innovation coming straight from people who live in these arrival cities. Sometimes the Jugaad spirit comes from people from outside these cities. So this is Jugaad inventor Arnaud Gaillard, who's from France. And actually his girlfriend is here, and she works at Flamingo. So he's a really good example of someone who's incorporated the spirit of Jugaad and brought it to these places. So he created the School in a Box, which is basically, and Delise, tell me if I'm messing this up, a combination of an iPad and a projector in a box. But basically his invention is that he's created two small solar panels which can power this tool, so it doesn't need to run on electricity. And what this is used for is it's used in low-income schools, and here it's in Indonesia, where they can project lots of educational materials through the iPad, through an internet connection, but very cheaply without electricity. His invention was so interesting that Apple has now approached him. They're providing lots of free iPads, and I think there's some other collaboration happening. So shame he's not here, but you should hook up with him if you want to know more about his invention. All right. So people sometimes are driving these innovations, Jugaad innovations, but sometimes it's coming from corporations as well. I love this story. This is the story of Haier. Have you heard of Haier? Yeah, so they're a Chinese electronics company. They make white goods. And so they've been extremely successful. They make really cheap washing machines. And they sold a lot of these washing machines in rural China. One day, some farmer called them up and says, hey, my washing machine is broken. What's going on? And so the technician goes there to see him. And the guy realizes that the stuff is clogged. And actually, the guy was washing potatoes in his washing machine. Like how, like you probably wouldn't, yeah. So Haier, being the Jugaad company that they are, if you thought about a Western company like an Electrolux or something like that, they would probably try to educate the guy and tell him, hey man, you're an idiot. Don't put the potatoes into your washing machine. Read the manual. But instead of doing that, they actually looked at it as an opportunity. So they actually investigated whether other people were doing the same. And they found out that actually a lot of farmers in rural areas in China had to wash their vegetables. And they came up with a washing machine that could wash both clothes and potatoes. And it's selling really well. So I thought that was just a really cool story. But they really approached it in this way. I think it's kind of the Jugaad spirit as well. All right. These are cool inventions, right? I think they're really cool. The really amazing thing with this is that these people, these innovations, they are now inspiring institutions like the Harvard Business School. So recently there's this book called Jugaad Innovation or Frugal Innovation that was written. And this is now standard reading at the Harvard Business School. And I think what companies and corporations in the developed world are realizing is that this is extremely relevant for them because more and more they are needing to innovate with very few resources. With the financial crisis happening now in Europe, for example, and they need to be very nimble and very agile, and they're actually learning from these people who had to hustle in places with very few resources, and now it's being taught in business schools. They're also looking at how can we incorporate the spirit of, or cross over the spirit of Jugaad into urban planning, into sustainable architecture, into government initiatives. So just using this kind of mindset into everything that they're doing. So if I were to sum up the spirit of Jugaad innovation, is basically not accepting what's given to you. It's not accepting what established organizations or businesses offer you, but I'm going to create my own opportunities. I'm creating my own options. And this is what these people have done, basically, which I think is really inspiring. And actually, it has inspired lots and lots of other businesses as well. I'm going to give you a few more examples. I'm sure everybody knows about Airbnb. I think the shared economy is one of the most, is the perfect example of this spirit. They've basically sidestepped established hotels, and so you can get access to accommodation without going through hotels. I was going to tell the story about the people who made Airbnb, but I don't think I have time for that. I'm going to move on quickly. We think about Uber as well. Uber is another great example. And funnily now, Uber, for a month, they've been embracing regular taxis as well. So it's kind of this weird thing. They started off as sidestepping established taxis, and now they're actually taking over. Which is really interesting. You've got services like Feastly, where you can go and have a meal at a local's place, a local's home, and have some really good authentic food and not having to go to restaurants. So this is another example of that Jugaad spirit. Absolute Vodka is kind of an example of that. So they wanted to create, they have these bottles which are designed around cities and countries. And they wanted to do one based on Indian heritage, or that reflected Indian heritage. And rather than going to established creative design companies, they actually asked people, locals, to create these designs for them. So they're kind of embracing that spirit as well. This is my last slide. And to conclude, I would just like to end it with a question. So I'm just thinking about what does this mean for businesses, for creatives, for innovators, like all of us who work in these fields. I think there's a tendency among in developed markets specifically, and in big companies, to always think about innovation as pushing boundaries of technology and trying to find that next big breakthrough idea. And actually, the spirit of Jugaad is not about that. They're actually looking for the next big value. And with very little resources. I think we've got a lot to learn from that. So my question to you is, how are you going to incorporate the spirit of Jugaad into your life and into your work? And that's it. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, okay. Sure.
If there are questions, we're going to have a mic and the camera with you, so please hold on to your question until we're there. Okay, I'll start with one.
Okay.
Adri, so just now you mentioned about Jugaad. Do you think that is going to act as a role model and sort of even make that urbanization faster, go faster in terms of the people moving to Jakarta? Because he moved up from down in the slums. Sorry, Jugaad. Oh, sorry. Did I pronounce it wrongly?
That's a good question, actually. I don't know whether it'll inspire more people to come to the city. But definitely what's happening now, since he's been the governor of Jakarta. So one of the big problems, for example, in China, I just read an article this morning, is that the pace of urbanization, so urban migration, is happening at a much faster pace than urban planning. Like places like Shanghai and the big cities, they're not ready actually for the influx of people coming in. And your question, I think, if you think about Jokowi when he was a governor, he's doing lots of amazing things to help the infrastructure in these big cities. And I think in that sense, yes, if a city becomes a nicer place to live and is much better prepared for urban migration, it may bring in more people in. Right now, it's the wrong way around. It's just people coming in and them not being ready. With people moving into the city, and especially with the emerging middle class, they have new needs, new desires, and they have lots of requirements for public facilities. So the two need to happen in parallel. I don't know if that answered your question.
Any other questions?
Right.
All right, on the side. It's on that side.
Does too much opportunity and spoon feeding and funding impede creativity then in terms of what you're saying in nations where in the situations where less opportunity is available, there seems to be so much more innovation. So what do we do about all that overindulgence?
I'm not sure I understood the question. So it's spoon feeding innovation.
I meant in situations where there's too much money, too much, search for creativity and innovation. Does that sort of really impede true creativity, or more?
Yeah.
So what do we do in situations where, like Singapore, where there's so much effort?
Well, you should go to Jakarta maybe and check it out. See what's happening there, and there's. I mean, I'm from there, so I really feel a spirit of entrepreneurial spirit, and we see that all across Southeast Asia. Singapore is so unique because we're kind of sheltered here and so different. But if you go to the Philippines, to Thailand, to Malaysia, Indonesia, there's so much happening right now in terms of this entrepreneurial spirit and just people hustling and making things happen. So it's quite inspiring to be part of that. Mm.
Hi, how do you encourage the very established FMCG companies to kind of take on the spirit and move away from the established ways of working that they have in the very developed markets to encourage them to enter the new markets such as Jakarta or the Philippines?
I don't think we need to encourage them. They have no choice because either their head office doesn't have enough money, or this is just the situation of the target audience that they need to target. So we're not telling them this. They need to operate in a much more nimble, efficient way. And also, like, a lot of the opportunities in these countries is actually market penetration, where people are using products for the very first time. It's not about finding the next sophisticated spray deodorant or something. It's people who are starting to use deodorant for the first time, or people who are starting to use a washing machine for the first time. So these are the kind of briefs that we're getting right now. And that's the big challenge. They need to have cash and money and R&D money, basically, to be able to figure out a way to manufacture their goods, not better, but a lot cheaper. Yeah.
You've lived in a number of countries. Do you feel like Jugaad is probably more in Asia than Europe, or it's about the same?
No, and actually, I had some other examples I forgot to mention. Actually, it's relevant in lots of places. Good question. Thank you. No, I mean, Jugaad is everywhere. I think the spirit, the word Jugaad, we felt really best incorporated this idea of necessity and ingenuity and creativity. But actually, in Brazil, they have a word for it. It's called jeitinho, which means finding a way. In China, I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, Jiju Chuangjin. And it means, I messed that up completely, didn't I? It means indigenous innovation. And it's a funny, like indigenous, what is it, the opposite of Western innovation? But yeah, it's not unique to these countries. It's everywhere where there is necessity and where people are driven to make it happen, basically. Mm.
We got time for one more question.
Actually, if I can just follow up that comment, I'm from Ireland and we've come through a particularly difficult time recently. And in our history, we've got a very difficult kind of economic background. But we came into money, and I suppose Ireland creativity maybe was stifled with all the wealth that we came in. We didn't know what to do with ourselves.
Yeah.
But just when the recession hit, since then, the spirit of entrepreneurialism and creativity that's come through, I think kind of feeds into what you're saying about the Jugaad. We don't have a word for it in Ireland. I think we call it desperation. but it's worked for us. So just to back up what you just said.
All right, great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. We good? All right.
Can we have one more round of applause
Thanks.
for Adri?
Thank you.